Kindness is the one variable no empire has ever learned to predict. The sentence appeared silently across a transparent observation screen orbiting far beyond human detection, while below, maintenance ring sea of Kestrel station rattled under the strain of a passing solar gust, metal panels ticking as they cooled and reheated in uneven cycles, the air carrying the faint scent of ionized dust and recycled oxygen pushed through aging filters that hummed at a steady 60 Hz. A sound Ethan Cole barely noticed anymore after 6 years working the night shift where nobody important ever walked and nothing historic was supposed to happen. He tightened a wrench against a leaking coolant valve, checking the pressure gauge as it crawled back towards safe levels, 72 psi, and climbing, good enough for another week if the system felt generous, and he wiped his hands on a gray utility rag already stained with grease older than some of the junior crew, muttering to himself that machines, unlike people, at least followed rules when treated right. Outside the reinforced viewport stretched an ocean of stars sharp enough to hurt the eyes, the nearby gas giant turning slowly beneath the station like a sleeping animal, storms flashing pale blue lightning across clouds thousands of miles wide, beautiful but distant, the kind of view management used in recruitment ads even though most workers never had time to look. Ethan checked his tablet, signed off another repair log, and prepared to move on when every light along the corridor flickered once, twice. Then shifted into emergency amber, not panic level, just enough to make the station feel suddenly aware of itself, and a low chime echoed overhead announcing unidentified debris entering proximity range. He sighed, assuming another chunk of mining scrap drifting off course, but the external sensors disagreed, numbers scrolling too fast across his screen, velocity unstable, heat signature irregular. Something small burning through vacuum at an angle no cargo pod should survive, and before he could call it in the entire structure trembled with a dull impact that rolled through the metal bones of the station like distant thunder. Somewhere beyond bulkhead 12, alarms began counting down containment checks, calm automated voices assuring everyone the situation was under evaluation, and Ethan instinctively grabbed his toolkit and started moving toward the impact zone because that was the job. Fix the problem before it became paperwork. The corridor light strobed softly as he jogged, boots striking grated flooring, breath syncing with the mechanical rhythm around him, unaware that dozens of silent observation drones adjusted their lenses to follow his movement precisely, recording heart rate, gait stability, hesitation markers, all data transmitted far beyond human space. When he reached the sealed maintenance hatch, frost already crept along its edges from sudden decompression on the other side, temperature readings dropping fast toward -40 Fahrenheit, and he hesitated only long enough to secure his oxygen mask before cycling the door open. Cold vapor spilled past him like ghostly water, swirling around his boots, and in the center of the damaged chamber lay a compact escape pod half buried in twisted railing, its surface scorched but intact, emergency lights blinking weakly in a slow, stubborn rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat refusing to quit. Ethan stepped closer, tools clinking softly at his side, unaware that far above the atmosphere of 3 separate worlds, an empire watched the moment frame by frame, waiting to see what a single human would choose to do next. Cold vapor curled along the floor as Ethan Cole crouched beside the escape pod, gloved fingers brushing frost from a cracked identification panel that displayed symbols he did not recognize, not station registry, not civilian freight, something older in design yet impossibly advanced in construction, the alloy surface smooth without seams as if grown instead of manufactured, and the temperature around it continued dropping despite the chamber heaters pushing at full capacity, reading -32 degrees Fahrenheit on his wrist display. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog inside the mask while diagnostic lights pulsed in uneven intervals, suggesting failing life support but stubborn survival, and he tapped the side hatch controls out of habit even though protocol required waiting for security clearance, because waiting meant risk and risk inside damaged machinery usually meant someone suffocating alone. The pod responded with a soft tone, not an alarm but almost an acknowledgement, and internal locks disengaged one by one with delicate precision that felt strangely intentional, causing Ethan to pause as if he had interrupted something private. When the hatch finally lifted a few inches, warmer air slipped outward carrying a faint metallic sweetness unfamiliar to human environments, and inside he saw a figure curled against the interior support frame, slender, motionless except for shallow breathing indicated by faint light moving beneath translucent fabric that shimmered like reflected starlight. Ethan swallowed, mind racing through regulations, quarantine rules, diplomatic warnings posted in every corridor since first contact treaties began decades earlier, yet none of those rules prepared him for the simple reality of another living being alone and clearly in distress. An instinct moved faster than policy as he lowered the hatch fully and scanned for visible injuries without touching anything yet, his training reminding him that unknown biology required caution but compassion refused to wait for certainty. The figure shifted slightly, revealing skin that carried a soft blue luminescence beneath the frost, not glowing brightly but enough to outline delicate features unfamiliar yet unmistakably expressive. And for a brief moment Ethan felt the strange awareness that he was being observed even though the chamber remained empty except for broken railings and drifting vapor. High above the station, silent observers adjusted analytical models as biometric data streamed across imperial displays, noting elevated human heart rate paired with reduced hesitation time, an anomaly compared to predicted caution responses. Ethan removed his outer thermal jacket despite the cold and placed it gently over the stranger, speaking aloud without realizing it because silence suddenly felt wrong, telling her she was safe even though he had no authority to promise that, his voice steady in the quiet chamber as station alarms faded back to routine status, leaving only distant machinery and the faint hum of life support struggling to stabilize. He activated a portable scanner and frowned at readings that refused standard classification, oxygen compatibility uncertain yet not immediately dangerous, pulse rhythm unlike any species listed in station databases yet steady enough to offer hope. And he realized security teams would arrive within minutes once impact reports finalized, which meant questions, containment, and procedures that rarely considered individual circumstances. Ethan hesitated again, longer this time, aware that whatever decision he made next would not fit neatly inside maintenance reports or shift summaries, and somewhere beyond human awareness and empire waited, not for perfection, not for strength, but for the quiet moment when an ordinary person chose whether rules mattered more than mercy. The station lights dimmed automatically as emergency power rerouted through secondary conduits, casting long bands of amber across the chamber walls while Ethan Cole adjusted the portable heater beside the open pod, careful to keep the temperature rising slowly so the fragile equilibrium inside would not collapse, and the stranger's breathing deepened almost imperceptibly beneath his jacket, each inhale accompanied by faint pulses of light beneath her skin like distant lightning moving through clouds. He checked the corridor again, counting seconds in his head because maintenance instincts always measured time against consequences. And he knew security response averaged 4 minutes and 12 seconds after confirmed impact events, leaving him less than 2 minutes. Before protocol replaced choice, a soft sound interrupted his calculations, not mechanical but vocal, a fragile tone that resonated somewhere between speech and music, and Ethan froze, unsure whether to step back or stay, choosing stillness instead as her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises layered with shifting silver patterns that reflected the overhead lights in impossible geometry, studying him not with fear but with careful evaluation, as though she was learning him faster than language. Aloud, he raised both hands slightly, palms visible, the universal gesture he remembered from first contact training modules, and spoke gently, explaining that she was on Meridian Relay Station, orbiting a mining corridor 30,000 miles above a gas giant, explaining things humans explained when nervous, facts instead of emotions, measurements instead of reassurance. She attempted to sit but faltered, the environmental difference clearly exhausting her, and Ethan instinctively steadied the air around her rather than touching, adjusting gravity compensation settings through his wrist console to reduce strain by 2%, a small technical kindness that required no permission. Across an unseen distance, observers noted the action, recording that the human-modified station systems without directives solely to reduce discomfort for an unidentified entity, a behavior categorized as statistically inefficient yet repeatedly observed in humanity. The alien's gaze softened as if understanding intention rather than words, and faint symbols flickered briefly along the interior hull of the pod, responding to her awareness, projecting star maps Ethan did not recognize, entire constellations rotating silently before fading again, leaving him with the uneasy realization that this was not a lost traveler but someone connected to technology far beyond civilian reach. Footsteps echoed faintly through distant corridors now, security teams approaching with predictable urgency. And Ethan felt the tightening pressure of decision closing around him, because once officials arrived she would become a case number, a containment subject, another unknown filed away behind sealed doors. he leaned closer, lowering his voice as though secrecy could exist inside. Open space, telling her he did not know who she was but that nobody deserved to wake up surrounded by strangers treating them like a problem, and for a moment her luminous eyes reflected something unmistakably human, relief mixed with exhaustion, before a faint harmonic tone filled the chamber and translated imperfectly through his helmet speakers into a single fragile word shaped slowly as if newly learned, safe. And Ethan realized with quiet certainty that whatever happened next, he had already crossed the invisible line between following orders and choosing empathy, while far beyond the station's orbit silent imperial sensors recalibrated their predictions, marking the human not as a variable but as a turning point. The first knock against the outer hatch echoed through the chamber like distant thunder softened by vacuum-insulated walls, and Ethan Cole felt the sound travel through the soles of his boots before the station intercom activated with a calm automated voice requesting status confirmation from maintenance personnel, its politeness unable to hide procedural urgency. He glanced toward the corridor display where security icons blinked closer every second, then back at the alien woman sitting partially upright within the pod, her breathing steadier now as warmth gradually replaced the frost that had once clung to her skin, faint light patterns shifting along her arms in slow rhythmic waves that resembled thought made visible. Ethan lowered his voice instinctively, explaining that others were coming and that humans sometimes reacted poorly to things they did not understand, choosing honesty instead of reassurance because he sensed she recognized intention more clearly than language. She watched him carefully, head tilting slightly as if mapping emotional tones rather than words, and a soft resonance filled the air again, translating imperfectly through his helmet speakers into fragments that formed slowly, learning shape and meaning as they emerged. You stayed, and the simplicity of the statement unsettled him more than any alarm because it sounded less like gratitude and more like discovery. He nodded once, unsure why the acknowledgement mattered so much, and adjusted the portable heater another few degrees while quietly disabling the automatic distress beacon attached to the pod, a decision that placed responsibility fully on him rather than station protocol, and somewhere far beyond visible space Imperial observers marked the action with heightened interest, noting deviation from expected compliance curves. The alien extended a trembling hand toward the edge of the pod, not reaching for him but toward the open air itself, and the chamber lights flickered briefly as surrounding systems recalibrated without command, gravity stabilizers smoothing fluctuations as if responding to her presence, prompting Ethan to stare at the control panel in disbelief because no local authorization had been issued. Distant footsteps grew louder now, boots against metal grating, voices exchanging clipped updates through comm channels, and Ethan felt the narrowing corridor of time closing again, forcing choice into motion rather than thought. He stepped closer and spoke quietly, telling her that security would ask questions and that he would answer them first, positioning himself unconsciously between her and the hatch as though shielding required no announcement, only placement. Her eyes followed the movement with something resembling concern, luminous patterns slowing as if she sensed risk not to herself but to him, and another translated phrase emerged softer than before, you protect, without claim, words shaped carefully as though testing a philosophy foreign to her species. Ethan gave a faint half-smile beneath the helmet, replying that sometimes people helped because it was the right thing, not because it belonged to them, and the statement lingered in the air just as the hatch began unlocking with a heavy mechanical sequence. The moment stretched, silent except for machinery and breathing, and unseen across vast distances. An empire recalculated centuries of assumptions about humanity, realizing that power had not drawn their attention to this small station, kindness had, and as the hatch seal released with a hiss of equalizing pressure, Ethan remained exactly where he stood, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a man who had simply chosen not to step aside. The hatch opened slowly with a measured mechanical sigh, revealing 3 security officers framed by corridor light, their uniforms immaculate despite emergency conditions, faces calm but alert in the practiced way of people trained to assume control of uncertainty, and Ethan Cole felt the subtle shift in atmosphere as authority entered the room, protocols filling the space like invisible gravity. The lead officer stepped forward, tablet already active, voice even as she requested identification and status confirmation, her gaze briefly scanning the alien figure before returning to Ethan as if deciding that he was the variable requiring explanation. Ethan removed his helmet carefully, letting recycled station air brush his face, and answered plainly, stating That the pod occupant required medical stabilization and that no hostile behavior had been observed, choosing precise language because truth often sounded safer when technical. Behind him, the alien watched silently, luminous patterns along her skin dimming slightly as unfamiliar voices layered the chamber with tension, and Ethan sensed the change immediately. The subtle withdrawal of someone unsure whether kindness had an expiration once witnesses arrived. The officers exchanged quiet glances. While scanning equipment registered unknown biological signatures, their instruments producing tones that hesitated between classification categories, and the lead officer requested that Ethan step aside so containment protocols could begin. He hesitated only a second, not out of defiance but calculation, realizing that stepping aside now would transform her from a person into an incident report, and he calmly explained that rapid environmental shifts might destabilize her condition, suggesting a slower transition supervised by maintenance personnel already familiar with the pod systems. The argument sounded reasonable because it was true, yet beneath it lay a quieter motive he did not fully analyze, the unwillingness to abandon someone who had just learned the meaning of safety. Distant sensors recorded the exchange while far beyond the station Imperial analysts noted increased emotional alignment between human and subject, labeling the interaction as mutual trust formation rather than containment resistance. One officer adjusted scanning equipment closer to the pod, and the alien's gaze shifted toward Ethan again, searching his expression rather than the strangers surrounding her, and a faint harmonic vibration passed through the air, barely audible yet enough to cause nearby monitors to flicker softly, drawing curious looks from the security team. Ethan spoke gently toward her, explaining that these people were there to help even as uncertainty lingered beneath his words, and the translated tone emerged again, clearer now, forming a question shaped by fragile comprehension. You remain, and he answered without hesitation that he would stay until she was safe, surprising himself with how natural the promise felt. The lead officer paused, studying him longer this time, perhaps recognizing that cooperation sometimes required trust rather than control, and she authorized temporary observational status instead of immediate containment, allowing Ethan to remain inside the chamber while medical staff prepared specialized equipment. Relief moved through the space quietly, unnoticed except by the alien whose luminous patterns brightened slightly like dawn touching distant clouds, and somewhere across immeasurable distance Imperial observers updated their assessment once more, concluding that humanity's defining trait was neither strength nor intelligence but persistence and compassion, the tendency to stand beside the vulnerable even when no reward existed. And as technicians approached slowly with adaptive life support units, Ethan remained exactly where he had chosen to stand, not resisting authority yet not surrendering responsibility, a single human presence acting as a bridge between fear and understanding. Medical equipment rolled into the chamber with quiet precision, soft wheels gliding across metal flooring while adaptive monitors unfolded like metallic flowers around the open pod, projecting translucent diagnostic fields that adjusted color continuously as they struggled to interpret unfamiliar biology, and Ethan Cole stepped slightly aside only when technicians required space, though his presence remained close enough that the alien could still see him without turning her head. The lead medic spoke calmly, explaining each action aloud more for Ethan's benefit than the patient's, describing temperature stabilization at 68 degrees Fahrenheit and atmospheric composition adjustments designed to minimize cellular stress, yet every measurement seemed tentative, human science reaching carefully toward something older and more complex. The alien observed the activity with quiet awareness, luminous patterns along her skin responding subtly to voices and movements, brightening when Ethan spoke and dimming whenever unfamiliar hands approached too quickly, prompting the medical team to slow their motions instinctively even without understanding why. One technician activated a translation interface near the pod, hoping structured language patterns might establish clearer communication, and after several moments the device emitted soft harmonic tones that synchronized imperfectly with the alien's natural resonance, producing fragmented phrases shaped slowly through effort rather than fluency. She turned her gaze toward Ethan again and asked, carefully, "You're kind, always remain," and the question carried curiosity instead of doubt, as though she was studying a principle rather than an individual. Ethan hesitated before answering, aware that he could not speak for humanity yet unwilling to offer cynicism in a moment built on trust, so he said that humans tried, sometimes imperfectly, but they tried to stay when it mattered, and the words settled into the room with unexpected weight, across unseen distances Imperial observation arrays recorded physiological responses, noting increased neural coherence within the alien subject whenever the human spoke, categorizing the interaction as stabilizing influence rather than coincidence. A faint vibration moved through the station hull then, subtle enough that only maintenance sensors registered it, and Ethan glanced upward automatically, recognizing the signature of a large vessel transitioning into distant orbit though no arrival had been scheduled. While security officers exchanged quiet messages through private channels, confusion spreading without alarm, the alien seemed to sense the shift immediately, her luminous patterns aligning into structured lines that resembled constellations, and for the first time she sat fully upright without assistance, strength returning. Not suddenly but with deliberate grace, as if recovery followed internal timing beyond medical prediction, she studied Ethan with renewed clarity and spoke again, the translation smoother now. Observation ends soon, a statement delivered gently rather than ominously, and Ethan frowned slightly, unsure what observation meant or who conducted it, yet the calm certainty in her tone carried no threat. Outside the chamber windows distant stars reflected against the curve of the gas giant below. Its storms turning slowly like living weather systems older than human history, and somewhere beyond those clouds an unseen fleet adjusted formation in silent anticipation. Inside the room, technicians continued their work unaware that their patient was no ordinary traveler, while Ethan remained beside her not because duty required it but because leaving no longer felt possible. And in that quiet intersection between science and compassion, between protocol and choice, the bond forming between two vastly different beings became the single variable no empire had successfully predicted. The station alarms did not sound loudly, yet everyone felt the change as external sensors registered an object entering orbit without broadcast identification, a presence so vast that gravitational monitors compensated automatically, adjusting rotational balance by fractions of a percent while the gas giant's reflected light dimmed slightly through observation windows. As though something immense had stepped between the station and the stars, Ethan Cole noticed the shift immediately because maintenance workers learned to listen to machines the way sailors listen to wind, and the vibration beneath his boots carried intention rather than malfunction, prompting him to glance toward the chamber viewport where unfamiliar silhouettes shimmered faintly against space, too distant for detail yet undeniably organized. Security officers received updates simultaneously, their calm professionalism tightening into controlled uncertainty as command channels filled with encrypted signals that no station system could decode, and the lead officer requested confirmation from Central Command only to receive silence followed by a directive instructing all personnel to maintain position and avoid escalation. Inside the chamber, the alien stood fully now, no longer dependent on medical supports, her posture balanced with quiet authority that had not been visible before, luminous patterns across her skin aligning into precise symmetrical lines that resembled ceremonial markings rather than biological reactions, and Ethan realized with sudden clarity that recovery had not simply restored her strength, it had revealed her true presence. She stepped forward slowly, movements graceful yet deliberate, and the surrounding equipment powered down one by one as if recognizing completion of their purpose, leaving only ambient station light reflecting across metallic walls. Technicians exchanged confused looks while readings normalized beyond expected parameters, every monitor reporting stability despite conditions that moments earlier had seemed uncertain. The alien turned toward Ethan first, not toward security or medical staff, and her voice emerged through the translation interface clearer than ever before. Carrying calm certainty shaped by understanding gained rather than programmed, observation concludes, she said gently, and the words caused the lead officer to stiffen slightly, sensing implications beyond routine contact. Ethan frowned, asking quietly what observation meant, and she studied him for a long moment before answering. Your actions were witnessed, her gaze softening with something almost like gratitude. You remained when departure was easier. Outside the station, massive vessels revealed themselves fully as light distortion fields faded, elegant structures stretching miles across space, their surfaces reflecting starlight like polished oceans, and every station display automatically shifted to passive mode under signals no human system could resist, not as an attack but as acknowledgement. Security teams held position, unsure whether to prepare defenses or welcome diplomacy, while across unseen command networks humanity's distant authorities scrambled to understand who had arrived. Within the chamber, however, the moment remained strangely intimate, because despite fleets and signals and silent power filling the sky, the alien's attention never left Ethan, as though the entire arrival existed only as consequence rather than purpose, and she spoke once more, voice steady and warm. "You shielded a stranger without knowing her worth," pausing briefly before adding, "That is why they came." And Ethan felt the weight of her words settle slowly. Realizing that the approaching empire had not arrived to judge humanity's strength or technology but to answer a single quiet decision made by an ordinary person who had chosen kindness before understanding. Silence spread through Meridian Relay Station in a way Ethan Cole had never experienced before, not the ordinary quiet of machinery between cycles but a living stillness, as if every system understood that something historic was unfolding beyond human authority, and through the observation windows immense vessels held position around the station without emitting threat signals, their surfaces glowing softly with shifting constellations that mirrored the alien woman's luminous markings. Station communications attempted contact repeatedly yet received only a single response, a harmonic transmission translated automatically into calm reassurance requesting patience rather than surrender, and security officers lowered their voices instinctively, sensing they were participants in an event larger than protocol allowed them to comprehend. The alien stepped closer to Ethan, her movements confident now, strength fully returned, and for the first time subtle details became clear to him. The symmetry of her posture, the quiet gravity others unconsciously respected, the way even trained officers gave her space without realizing they had done so. She regarded the room gently, eyes reflecting every human present, then spoke through the translator with clarity untouched by earlier hesitation, explaining that her people studied civilizations not through conquest or negotiation but through moments of unobserved choice, searching for species capable of mercy without expectation of reward. Technicians listened without interrupting, confusion slowly giving way to awe as her words reframed everything that had happened since the pod arrived, and Ethan felt a strange embarrassment realizing that his actions, which had felt small and obvious, were now being described as rare. Outside, one of the enormous vessels shifted slightly, releasing a beam of light that stopped short of the station hull, forming instead a silent lattice in space like an open doorway waiting for invitation rather than demanding entry. She turned back toward Ethan and explained that she had traveled alone intentionally, concealed beneath damaged systems so responses would remain authentic, and that many worlds had failed the observation by choosing caution over compassion, efficiency over empathy, yet humanity had produced a different answer in a maintenance chamber far from political power. Ethan struggled to respond, shaking his head slightly as he insisted that he was only doing his job, only helping someone who needed it, and she smiled faintly at the simplicity of the statement, replying that greatness often disguised itself as ordinary decency. The lead security officer asked quietly what the Empire intended now, and the alien paused before answering, gaze drifting toward the stars beyond the glass. "Recognition," she said softly, explaining that first contact would proceed not through governments alone but through trust, because the Empire believed alliances must begin with individuals rather than institutions. Outside, additional lights awakened along the alien fleet, not weapons but signals spreading outward across space in mathematical patterns, announcing presence without dominance, invitation without pressure. Ethan watched the display feeling both insignificant and strangely central, aware that nothing about his life had prepared him for this moment yet also realizing that nothing extraordinary had been required of him except kindness. The alien faced him once more, luminous patterns settling into calm steady light, and spoke quietly enough that only he heard, "You changed how they see your world." And as those words settled between them, Ethan understood that history had not turned because of power or strategy but because, in a cold room on an ordinary shift, one human had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. The fleet remained motionless beyond the station, vast shapes suspended in patient silence while Meridian Relay slowly resumed normal power cycles, light stabilizing and machinery returning to familiar rhythms as if reality itself needed time to accept what had changed. And Ethan Cole stood near the observation window watching reflected starlight glide across alien hulls that stretched farther than his eyes could measure, feeling smaller than he ever had yet strangely steadier inside. Behind him, station personnel moved carefully, voices hushed not by fear but by reverence, each person aware that history had quietly crossed a threshold without ceremony or announcement. The alien woman approached the window beside him, her luminous patterns now calm and constant, no longer reactive but settled like a completed equation, and she looked outward not with pride but with gentle responsibility. As though the arriving empire was not power she commanded but trust she carried, she explained softly that her people believed civilizations revealed their true nature not during triumph but during unnoticed moments when compassion cost something, and that countless worlds had demonstrated brilliance without kindness, progress without mercy, strength without care, yet humanity had revealed another possibility through a single unscripted choice. Ethan shook his head faintly, insisting again that anyone would have helped, and she regarded him with quiet understanding before replying that history often depended on the one person who believed that statement enough to act on it. Outside, one of the great vessels emitted a final wave of light that spread across space like dawn, signals traveling faster than sight toward distant systems, announcing peaceful contact protocols initiated by imperial decree, and station communication panels filled with translations confirming alliance intent rather than evaluation. Security officers lowered defensive readiness entirely, replaced by diplomatic channels activating for the first time with genuine optimism. The alien turned toward Ethan once more and told him that her observation role had ended and that she would soon depart to begin formal dialogue between their civilizations, yet her voice carried a note of hesitation, as though leaving mattered more than she expected. Ethan felt the weight of the moment without knowing what words were appropriate, so he simply thanked her for trusting him, an ordinary phrase that felt strangely sufficient. She smiled softly, luminous eyes reflecting both stars and station lights, and said that trust had begun the moment he chose presence over caution, adding quietly that humanity would now be remembered not for its technology or defenses but for its capacity to care before understanding. A transport field formed gently around her, light folding inward without sound, and as it lifted her slowly toward the waiting fleet she kept her gaze on him until distance softened detail into glow. The chamber fell silent again after her departure, yet the silence no longer felt empty, only full of meaning left behind. Ethan remained at the window long after others returned to duty, watching the immense ships align and then glide away one by one, leaving the stars unobstructed and unchanged except for the knowledge that someone out there now saw humanity differently. He exhaled slowly, realizing his shift report would never capture what had truly happened, because nothing dramatic had saved the day, no battle, no grand speech, only a moment when a human stayed beside a stranger who needed warmth. And as the last alien vessel vanished into light, the reflection in the glass showed an ordinary man standing alone, proof that sometimes the smallest act of mercy becomes the reason an entire universe decides to believe in you.